My name is Eleanor Whitaker. I am 58 years old, and on December 22nd at 7:14 in the evening, I stood in the yellow light of my kitchen in Cincinnati, Ohio, with my phone pressed against my ear, while my younger brother explained that I should not come to Christmas Eve dinner. He used a soft voice, the same one executives use when they are firing someone and hoping the person will thank them for the opportunity. He said the house would be full of serious people this year: board contacts, investors, several clients from Chicago, and a retired senator who had apparently discovered our family only after my brother became useful to him. He said my recent tension with him might make everyone uncomfortable. Recent tension. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon tea and lemon cleaner. The old radiator under the window made a tiny clicking sound every 13 seconds, a sound I had learned to ignore during tax season, product launches, and the 3 winters when I still believed family conflict could be solved by being more patient than everyone else. Across from me, on the refrigerator, was a picture from 1999. Me in a denim jacket, my brother Grant still in braces, our parents smiling beside a cardboard sign that said, "Opening Day." That sign belonged to my company. I had founded Whitaker Risk Systems 26 years earlier in a rented second-floor office above a vacuum repair shop on Vine Street. The carpet was gray, the windows leaked cold air, and the bathroom key was attached to a wooden spoon so nobody would steal it by accident. I built fraud detection tools for regional banks before the phrase sounded impressive, before venture capital discovered compliance software, before anyone in my family could explain what I did without saying, "She works with computers and money." Grant joined 15 years later with an MBA, a navy cashmere coat, and the kind of smile that made older men in boardrooms believe he had invented sunlight. He was 10 years younger than me, prettier in photographs, smoother in conversation, better at saying nothing in a way that sounded strategic. My parents adored him for it. They called him natural. They called me intense. For a long time, I thought that was harmless. Grant could manage investors while I managed the architecture. He could shake hands while I wrote detection logic that kept credit unions from losing $4.6 million to synthetic identities in a single quarter. He could turn complexity into a story while I made sure the story was actually true. I was wrong. The first thing he stole was not code. It was language. At a retreat in Hocking Hills in February of 2021, he asked me how I was reducing false positives in layered transaction behavior. The cabin smelled like pine smoke and damp wool, and snow tapped softly against the windows while our parents played cards in the next room. He leaned on the kitchen island with a beer in his hand and made the question sound like admiration. "How do you get the engine to tell the difference between noise and intent?" he asked. I answered because he was my brother. I told him about weighted behavior clusters, the 72-hour velocity window, the way weak indicators could become strong only when they repeated across unrelated accounts. I did not show him the repository. I did not give him model weights or training pathways, but I gave him the shape of my thinking, and sometimes, to a thief, shape is enough. 3 weeks later, I saw my private phrasing in a strategic memo with Grant's name at the top. Not copied exactly. That would have been too careless. He changed behavior clusters to intent constellations and velocity window to adaptive risk horizon, but the bones were mine, and I recognized bones. When I confronted him in his glass-walled office, he smiled as if I had brought him a weather report. "Ellie," he said, "we think alike. That's why this partnership works." Partnership. That was the first word he used to erase me. After that, the small injuries began arriving in organized shipments. My calendar invitations disappeared. My updates were summarized by Grant before I could speak. When a bank president from Columbus asked a technical question, Grant answered with one of my diagrams and called it a framework my team has been refining. When I corrected him later, he told me I had embarrassed him in front of clients. Then he got to our parents. My mother, Helen, began asking why I sounded so territorial. My father, Victor, said Grant had always been better with people, and maybe I should be grateful that he knew how to present what I created. At Sunday dinners, if I mentioned a concern, the table developed an immediate interest in potatoes. If Grant complained that I was difficult, Everyone leaned in like he was offering medical advice. That is how family gaslighting works. It does not begin with a scream. It begins with everyone agreeing to misname the wound. By June of 2022, I stopped arguing and started auditing. I bought a red binder from an Office Depot on Glenway Avenue for $8.79, not because I needed a binder, but because I needed an object that could hold the truth without flinching. Inside it went repository exports, dated screenshots, meeting notes, Slack messages, investor decks, and the first notarized statement from a senior engineer who had watched Grant remove my name from a milestone report at 11:42 p.m. on May 3rd. I also downloaded server access logs. Those logs were ugly. On 7 separate nights between March 18th and April 2nd, Grant's executive credentials accessed the protected development archive for the Lantern compliance engine from an IP address assigned to his home router, 73.88.214.16. Two of those logins happened after midnight. One happened at 2:06 a.m. on a Sunday, exactly 16 minutes before the archive was cloned to an external storage device. He was not studying my work. He was extracting it. I took the binder to an intellectual property attorney named Anita Rosen in a narrow office downtown that smelled like burnt coffee and old floor wax. She was 63, wore square glasses, and had the calmest voice of any person I had ever met. For 3 hours, she listened while I explained the architecture, the company history, the family version, and the difference between collaboration and theft. When I finished, she tapped the red binder with one finger. "The most dangerous person in a company," she said, "is the person who believes proximity is ownership." I remember that sentence because it explained my brother better than any diagnosis ever could. Grant had not built Whitaker Risk Systems. He had grown up near the woman who did. He had watched me miss birthdays, cancel vacations, and sleep under a conference table during the first Ohio Bank emergency of 2008. Somehow, in his mind, being near the sacrifice entitled him to the reward. That is appetite wearing a family name. By the fall of 2023, Grant had become Chief Executive Officer in everything but title. I was still listed as founder and Chief Technology Officer, but the board had started treating me like a historical artifact. Important, inconvenient, and best kept behind glass. Investors wanted Grant on panels. Trade magazines wanted Grant on covers. My parents wanted Grant at the head of every table. I kept working. The Lantern engine was my last private line. It was a predictive compliance system designed for federally insured regional banks, built to detect layered fraud across deposit accounts, loan applications, vendor payments, and wire activity without drowning analysts in false positives. It was not glamorous. It was not simple. It was 4 years of research, 314 development builds, and $620,000 in deferred salary I never took because payroll mattered more than my comfort. Grant wanted it because investors loved it. He did not understand all of it, but he understood enough to sell it. He understood the language. He understood the diagrams. He understood that if he stood in a blue suit under expensive lighting and said, "My breakthrough," most people would believe the man with the microphone over the woman with the commit history. The industry dinner happened on November 16th, 2024, in Chicago. Grant told me it was routine, a networking event, nothing technical, no need for me to fly out. That night, I sat alone in my condo eating reheated minestrone while rain moved across the windows like static. At 8:31 p.m., an engineer I trusted texted me a live stream link and 6 words. "Ellie, please tell me you knew." I clicked. There was my brother on a stage at the Drake Hotel, standing beneath a 20-foot screen with our company logo behind him. He accepted the Midwest Financial Innovation Award for his visionary work on the Lantern engine. He thanked our parents for teaching him grit. He thanked the board for trusting his leadership. He thanked his wife for believing in his late nights. He did not say my name. Then the slides began. My chest went cold in a way I can still feel when I remember it. He used my 3-layer visual model, my escalation hierarchy, my weather under the radar metaphor from a private design memo, and a performance chart built from test data I had generated in August. He said the system had been conceived under my leadership and guided by my strategic insight. The ballroom applauded. My parents stood up. That was the night grief left the room and precision sat down in its chair. I did not call Grant. I did not call my parents. I called Anita Rosen first. Then I called a financial crimes journalist named Rachel Voss, who had once interviewed me for a small article about women disappearing behind male-led fintech brands. Rachel had a voice like a locked drawer. She did not flatter. She asked dates, names, document paths, and whether I was willing to go on record if the evidence supported publication. I am not ready to go on record, I told her, but I am ready for you to see what I have. She went quiet after the first 20 minutes. Then she said, Eleanor, this is not just attribution theft. If those investor materials cross state lines with false ownership claims, and if federally insured banks relied on them, this is a fraud story. A fraud story. Not a family misunderstanding, not sibling tension, not a woman being too sensitive about credit. A fraud story. After Thanksgiving, the family cruelty became decorative. My parents hosted dinner at a rented lodge outside Louisville and never invited me. I found out from Facebook at 9:06 that night because my mother posted 12 professional photographs of linen napkins, crystal glasses, and my brother carving turkey like a campaign ad. The caption read, "Grateful for the children who know how to show up." I stared at those words for a long time. It is remarkable how people can sharpen a knife and call it a centerpiece. 2 days later, I found the forgery. It was buried in a board consent packet dated September 9th. According to the document, I had signed an assignment transferring all Lantern-related intellectual property to a holding subsidiary called WRS Innovation Partners, LLC. My signature was there, or something pretending to be my signature. The problem was that on September 9th at 2:18 p.m., when the document claimed I signed in Cincinnati, I was in a deposition room in Indianapolis giving sworn testimony in a bank fraud case. There were court transcripts, parking receipts, security footage, and a hotel folio with my name on it. The forgery was sloppy. Arrogance usually is. Anita moved fast after that. She hired a forensic document examiner in Dayton, pulled notary records, preserved metadata, and sent a legal hold notice to Whitaker Risk Systems, the board, outside counsel, and 3 cloud vendors. I contacted 2 former engineers, Martin Shaw in Denver and Priya Collins in Minneapolis, both of whom had left after Grant presented their work as executive insight. They gave declarations. Then 2 more people came forward. Then a former finance manager sent me a spreadsheet showing R&D tax credit claims tied to Lantern development hours, with my name removed and Grant's office listed as the originating department. The numbers were exact. $782,400 in federal research credits across 2 tax years, based on documentation that pretended Grant's executive team had directed the technical work. IRSCI would care about that. So would the banks. By December 10th, the red binder had become 4 binders. Red for intellectual property. Black for investor misrepresentations. Blue for tax credits. Manila for family communications, because humiliation deserves a paper trail too. I had mirrored everything to 2 encrypted drives, one in Anita's safe and one in a safe deposit box at Fifth Third Bank on Fountain Square. The password hint was a sentence only I would understand. He mistook silence for consent. Then, on December 22nd, Grant called and told me not to come for Christmas Eve. He said it would be better for everyone. He said Mom and Dad agreed. He said there were high-level relationships at stake, and my presence might create awkward questions. When he said awkward questions, I looked at the red binder on my kitchen table and felt something inside me settle like a scale finding 0. "Does Mom know you are saying this?" I asked. He paused too long. "We all think it is best," he said. There it was, the entire family verdict delivered in a corporate tone. I did not beg. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the old opening day photograph on my refrigerator, the one where Grant was still young enough to look at me like I had hung the moon, and I felt no desire to explain myself to people who had learned to benefit from misunderstanding me. "I understand," I said. And I did. At 7:39 p.m., I texted Anita 2 words. "Green light." At 7:41 p.m., I texted Rachel Voss the same thing. At 8:03 p.m., I emailed the board chair, Malcolm Reeves, a message with no emotion in it. It contained a preservation notice, a summary of the forged IP assignment, the access log extracts, the tax credit discrepancies, a list of witnesses, and a sentence Anita helped me write. If the company proceeds with any transaction, licensing event, investor disclosure, or product launch involving Lantern without immediate correction, you may expose the company and individual officers to civil and criminal liability. I slept 4 hours that night. The next morning smelled like snow and exhaust. I walked to a FedEx office with 2 identical legal packets in a canvas bag and watched a tired clerk place adhesive labels on boxes addressed to New York, Chicago, Columbus, and Washington, D.C. The printer behind her coughed every few seconds. A man in line argued about holiday shipping prices. Nobody in that room knew I had just placed my brother's public life inside the mail system. That is the thing about real revenge. It often looks like paperwork. Christmas Eve at my parents' house was not really dinner. It was a performance. Grant had turned their old brick home in Hyde Park into a private networking salon with valet parking, hired servers, white poinsettias, and bourbon smoked under glass domes. My mother wore pearls and a cream dress that probably cost more than my first company server. My father stood by the fireplace, telling anyone who would listen that Grant had saved the family business from becoming too technical. I know because Malcolm Reeves called me at 6:22 p.m. His voice was low, strained, and stripped of the friendly polish he used in quarterly meetings. He had read enough. The board's outside counsel had read enough. One bank client's general counsel had read enough to freeze a $14 million pilot agreement scheduled for signature that night. And because 2 of those client banks were federally insured institutions, their counsel had already flagged the packet to a contact at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and to a financial crimes liaison. "Eleanor," Malcolm said, "are you close by?" I looked at the 4 binders lined on my dining table. "Yes." "Can you come to the house?" I put on a charcoal wool coat, black flats, and the same silver watch I wore the day I filed the incorporation papers in 1998. I did not dress for victory. I dressed for record-keeping. The air outside was sharp enough to sting my eyes, and the inside of my car smelled faintly of peppermint gum and cold leather. At 7:08 p.m., I pulled up 2 houses away from my parents' home. There were lights in every window. Through the glass, I could see movement. Shadows crossing gold walls, people laughing with wine glasses in their hands. For a second, the old part of me wanted to stay in the car, the part trained by birthdays, hospital rooms, childhood Christmas mornings, and all the small loyalties that make betrayal so hard to name. Then my phone buzzed. It was my niece, Grant's 23-year-old daughter, Emily. "Aunt Ellie, Dad is telling people you retired because you couldn't keep up. Is that true?" I stared at the message until the letters stopped shaking. "No," I wrote back, "it is not true." Then I picked up the red binder and walked to the front door. The house smelled like cedar garland, roasted beef, expensive cologne, and the faint metallic heat of too many bodies in too many rooms. A hired pianist was playing "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" near the dining room, and each note floated over the room like it had no idea what was coming. The first person to see me was my mother. Her smile died in pieces. "Eleanor," she whispered. Grant turned from a circle of investors beside the mantel. He looked perfect. Navy suit, white pocket square, scotch in his hand, mouth already shaping itself into charm. For half a second, panic moved across his face like a fish under ice. Then he recovered. "Well," he said, loud enough for people to turn, "this is unexpected." The room softened into silence. I did not answer him. I walked past the Christmas tree, past the senator, past my father holding a glass he suddenly did not know what to do with, and placed the red binder on the mahogany coffee table. The sound was not loud. It did not need to be. Leatherette on polished wood can be louder than a shout when everyone knows it contains something. Grant laughed once. "What is this?" "Your correction," I said. He blinked. Malcolm Reeves stepped out of the hallway with 2 board members and a woman I recognized as outside counsel for one of our largest bank clients. Behind them stood Anita Rosen, her square glasses reflecting the Christmas lights. I had not known she would come. I have never been so relieved to see an attorney holding a tote bag. Grant's smile tightened. "Malcolm, this is a family matter." "No," Malcolm said. "It is not." That was the first crack. My father tried to intervene. He had always believed his voice could restore order if he made it deep enough. "Now everyone take a breath," he said. "This is Christmas Eve." I looked at him then, really looked, at the man who taught me to balance a checkbook when I was 12, then spent the last 3 years pretending numbers did not matter if they embarrassed his son. His face was red. His eyes were pleading, not with Grant to tell the truth, but with me to stop making truth visible. That hurt, but it did not move me. Anita opened the binder to tab 1. This is the original Lantern development timeline, beginning April 11th, 2020, with repository hashes, archive test environments, and third-party validation. Tab 2 contains access logs showing unauthorized executive-level extraction from the protected archive. Tab 3 contains the forged intellectual property assignment dated September 9th, 2024. Grant's wife put her hand over her mouth. A server froze beside the piano with a tray of smoked salmon canapes. My mother made a tiny sound, almost a gasp, but not quite. She looked at Grant, waiting for him to explain it away. That was her instinct. Not to ask what had happened, but to wait for the prettier version to arrive. Grant delivered it. "This is absurd," he said. "Eleanor has been unstable for months. She has been resentful of the company's direction, and frankly, everyone here knows she struggles with collaboration." There it was. The old spell. Difficult, unstable, resentful. Words used to turn a woman's accuracy into a personality disorder. I reached into the pocket of my coat and took out a single printed page. It was not the strongest document in the binder. It was not the most technical. But it was the one I wanted my parents to see. "On September 9th, I said, you filed a document claiming I assigned Lantern to WRS Innovation Partners. You used a signature that was not mine. At the exact time the document says I signed it, I was in Indianapolis, in Deposition Room 4B at the Marion County Federal Building, giving testimony under oath. There are transcripts, security logs, 2 parking receipts, and a hotel folio confirming it." Grant said nothing, so I continued. "The notary stamp on that document belongs to a woman named Carla Meeks. Carla gave a sworn statement yesterday that she never witnessed my signature. She said your assistant brought the document to her already signed and told her it was urgent for a year-end closing file." Grant's hand lowered at his side. The scotch glass clicked against his wedding ring. That tiny sound was the first honest thing he had contributed all night. My mother whispered, "Grant?" He turned on me then. Not fully, not loudly, because men like my brother always perform control until control becomes impossible. "You are destroying the company," he said. "No," I said. "I am documenting who did." Outside counsel for the bank client cleared her throat. "Our institution is suspending all agreements related to Lantern pending investigation. We have also notified our regulators because these representations were included in materials sent across state lines and relied upon by federally insured entities." The senator suddenly remembered another room. 2 investors moved away from Grant as if fraud might stain fabric. Malcolm looked older than he had on any earnings call. "Grant, effective immediately, the board is placing you on administrative leave. Your access has been suspended. You are not to contact employees, clients, investors, vendors, or the press without counsel present." Grant laughed, but it came out wrong. "You cannot do that in my parents' living room." Malcolm did not blink. "We just did." That was the second crack. The third came when Anita removed a blue folder from her tote bag and set it beside the red binder. The blue folder was thinner. Somehow, it looked more dangerous. "This concerns federal R&D tax credit filings," she said. The company claimed $782,400 in credits based on records that appear to misattribute technical development control. "We have provided copies to tax counsel. We strongly recommend preservation of all accounting records." Grant's face changed. Not with shame, not yet. With calculation. He looked toward my parents, toward the investors, toward the hallway, as if somewhere in that house there was still an exit marked family loyalty. There was not. He had spent years building a room where I was invisible, and now he was learning that invisible people can still keep receipts. "Ellie," he said quietly, finally using the childhood version of my name. "Can we talk?" My mother exhaled, relieved, as if tenderness had entered the room. It had not. "No," I said. One word, clean as a blade. Grant's daughter Emily stood near the staircase with tears running silently down her face. I had not seen her come in. She looked at her father like a person watching a statue turn back into stone. That was the only moment I almost lost focus, because children pay for adult lies, even when they did not sign the documents. Grant followed my eyes and used it. "Are you proud of yourself?" he asked. "Doing this in front of my daughter?" I turned back to him. "You used her college scholarship gala last spring to announce a product you knew you had stolen. You used Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner to tell donors I had become a bottleneck. You used Christmas Eve to gather clients and investors around a false story while telling me to stay home because the truth would make people uncomfortable. Do not lecture me about audience selection." The room did not breathe. Even the piano had stopped. Grant's wife began to cry. My mother sat down as if her knees had been cut. My father placed his glass on the mantel and missed the coaster by 4 inches. Somewhere in the kitchen, a dishwasher hummed on, ordinary and indifferent. Then my phone buzzed. At 8:01 p.m., Rachel Voss's article went live. I did not read it in the room. I did not need to. Within 90 seconds, 3 phones chimed, then 6, then more. A board member looked down and whispered a word I will not repeat. The headline was direct enough that everyone understood before the article fully loaded. Founders Work, Brothers Award, Inside Whitaker Risk Systems Lantern Fraud Allegations. Grant reached for his phone, and Malcolm stepped closer. "Do not delete anything," Anita said. That was the 4th crack. The collapse took longer than people think. Public exposure feels instant, but consequences arrive in layers. First came the internal suspension. Then the client freezes. Then the press calls. Then the preservation orders. Then the board's independent investigation. Then, in January, the FBI Financial Crimes Unit requested interviews tied to investor disclosures and interstate wire communications. In February, IRS Criminal Investigation opened a review of the R&D credit filings. In March, the company's outside auditors refused to sign amended statements without full cooperation. Grant resigned on March 18th. The press release said he was leaving to spend time with family. Family had other plans. His wife moved out in April. Emily stopped answering his calls for 6 weeks, then agreed to meet him only in a therapist's office. The country club suspended his membership after donors complained. The senator deleted every photograph they had taken together. Whitaker Risk Systems lost the Chicago pilot, 2 bank renewals, and 1 acquisition offer that would have made Grant rich enough to pretend morality was for people with smaller houses. By June, the board voted to restore my founder attribution publicly and negotiate my exit on terms that made their attorneys sweat. I took the Lantern architecture, my validated development assets, and 12 employees who wanted to build without needing to clap for thieves. We formed a new company called Ledgervale Analytics in Covington, Kentucky, in an office overlooking the river. The walls were brick. The windows rattled when freight trains passed. The first coffee machine burned everything after 2 p.m. It felt honest. Our first contract was with a community bank that had nearly been destroyed by a payroll fraud ring. The chief risk officer was a woman named Denise Palmer, 51 years old, with tired eyes and no patience for sales theater. She asked me one technical question, then another, then 27 more. When I answered all of them without once saying, "Visionary," she signed a pilot agreement for $640,000. That was the first time in years I slept through the night. My parents tried to rewrite the ending at first. My mother left voicemails about forgiveness. My father sent one email with the subject line, "Family Meeting," as if betrayal were a scheduling conflict. Neither of them began with, "We were wrong." Neither of them said, "We chose convenience over truth." They wanted peace without confession. I did not attend. In August, my mother mailed me the old opening day photograph from her refrigerator. She wrapped it in tissue paper and included a note that smelled faintly of her lavender hand cream. It said, "I am beginning to understand how much we ask you to swallow." Beginning. That word mattered. Not because it fixed anything, but because it did not pretend to. My father called 2 weeks later and cried so hard I could barely understand him. He said he had believed Grant because believing him allowed the family to feel successful without examining who paid for the success. He said he was ashamed. I believed that he was ashamed. I did not yet believe he understood. Grant called me once before the plea hearing. His voice sounded smaller, flattened by legal fees and public humiliation. He had sold the house in Indian Hill, moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near Dayton, and taken consulting work under a name that no longer opened doors. The criminal case had narrowed, as cases often do, to wire fraud conspiracy, false statements in investor materials, and tax-related filings. His attorneys were negotiating. "Ellie," he said, "I thought you would protect the family." I was standing in the Ledgervale office kitchen, watching rain blur the river outside. The room smelled like burnt coffee and wet concrete from the construction downstairs. Behind me, someone laughed at a terrible joke near the printer. Life had continued without asking permission. "I did protect the family," I said. "I stopped pretending you were allowed to feed on it." He was silent. Then, for the first time in my life, my brother said something close to truth. "I kept thinking," he whispered, "that because you built it for us, it belonged to us." There it was. Not an apology, not enough, but a crack wide enough for light to enter. "You were wrong," I said. "I know," he answered. I did not forgive him on that call. Forgiveness is not a coupon people can redeem when consequence becomes uncomfortable. But I heard the defeat in him, and beneath it, maybe the first shape of a man who had finally met the edge of himself. The hearing was on October 6th, in a federal courthouse that smelled like floor wax, paper, and old air conditioning. Grant wore a gray suit without a pocket square. My parents sat 2 rows behind him, smaller than I remembered. When the judge asked whether he understood the plea, Grant said yes. When she asked whether he had misrepresented the origin and ownership of lantern-related materials to investors and clients, he swallowed once. Then he said yes again. The sound of that word did not make me happy. It made me free. He received 18 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, restitution tied to legal and audit costs, and a permanent bar from serving as an officer of any company handling regulated financial compliance without disclosure. Some people online said it was too little. Some said it was too much. People who have never been erased love measuring the correct size of someone else's justice. I measured something else. I measured the quiet afterward. No more defensive Sunday dinners. No more explaining my own work to people committed to misunderstanding it. No more watching my mother smile at the person holding the knife because his suit was nicer than my evidence. No more shrinking so the family picture could remain symmetrical. The first Christmas after all of it, I did not go home. I hosted 12 people at my apartment. 3 engineers, Denise from the bank, Anita Rosen, Rachel Voss, my neighbor from downstairs, and Emily. My niece arrived with a grocery store pie and red eyes, and when she hugged me, she whispered, "I am sorry I believed him." I told her she was a child inside a story adults built around her. That was true. We ate too much, burned the rolls, played old Motown records, and watched snow collect on the balcony rail. Nobody made a speech. Nobody asked me to be smaller. When someone raised a glass to Ledgervale's first profitable quarter, I felt a strange ache behind my ribs, the kind that comes when your body realizes it no longer has to brace for impact. Peace can feel like grief at first. You keep waiting for the old injury to announce itself. You keep expecting the phone call, the accusation, the family vote taken without you. Then, one morning, the radiator clicks, the coffee tastes normal, and the framed photographs on your wall no longer look like evidence against you. They look like history. What I learned is not that revenge heals everything. It does not. Documentation does not give you back the years you spent hoping people would love you more than they loved the convenient lie. A court order cannot restore every dinner where you swallowed the truth because your mother looked tired and your father said, "Let's not ruin the evening." But evidence can return your name to you, and sometimes that is enough to begin again. So if you are listening to this and someone in your family has turned your loyalty into a leash, remember this carefully. Love that requires your disappearance is not love. It is consumption. A person who benefits from your silence will always call your truth cruel when it finally costs them something. Do not scream if you can document. Do not beg if you can verify. Do not confuse being excluded from a dishonest room with being alone. And if they call you difficult because you refuse to vanish, let them. Difficult is what dishonest people call the person who kept the receipts. Difficult is what thieves call the locked door. Difficult is what a family says when the person they counted on to absorb the damage finally becomes the witness. My brother told me not to come for Christmas because I would make everyone uncomfortable. He was right. The truth is very uncomfortable when the whole room has been decorated around a lie. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments how old you are and where you are watching from. Have you ever been treated like the difficult one simply because you refuse to be erased? Share your story below, because someone else may need to read it tonight. And if you believe quiet people with evidence are more dangerous than loud people with excuses, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next story.